Welcome to Cheater Confessions. Let's get started with today's story. For 3 years, my life revolved around work and fertility appointments. My name is Tony. I owned a freight and warehouse company that handled deliveries across 3 states. The business was doing well, but most of the money I made seemed to disappear into doctor visits, treatments, and tests. My wife Stephanie wanted a child more than anything. So did I. We went through 2 rounds of fertility treatment. Both failed. The second failure hit her hard. One night, she sat at the kitchen table staring at a stack of medical papers. "What if it never happens?" she asked quietly. I sat across from her. "Then we'll figure it out. You make everything sound simple. That's because panicking doesn't solve anything." She smiled a little. Back then, I thought we were on the same team. I was wrong. A few months later, everything changed. I came home from work and found Stephanie crying in the living room. For 1 second, I thought something terrible had happened. Then she held up a pregnancy test. Positive. I stared at it. Then I looked at her. "You're serious?" She nodded through tears. "We did it." I picked her up and spun her around the room. For the first time in years, it felt like all the pressure disappeared. That night, we ordered takeout and called our families. Everyone celebrated, especially Stephanie's mother, Linda. I had never trusted Linda. She had spent years pretending to be polite while making it clear she thought Stephanie deserved someone richer, someone more connected, someone from the social circles she spent her life chasing. But the moment she heard about the pregnancy, she transformed. Suddenly she was calling me family, complimenting me, offering to help with everything. A little too much. Within weeks, Linda was involved in every appointment, every decision, every conversation. The first time I offered to attend an ultrasound, Stephanie hesitated. Linda answered before she could. "They only allow one support person." "Since when?" I asked. "New policy." Something about her tone bothered me. Still, I let it go. I had warehouses to run and contracts to manage. I focused on building a future. I renovated a spare room into a nursery. I bought furniture. I worked longer hours. Then something happened that made me stop. One evening, Stephanie left her phone on the kitchen counter while she showered. The screen lit up. I wasn't trying to snoop, but a preview appeared on the lock screen. I only caught part of it before the screen dimmed. It was enough. The message said, "Your mother says we need to be more careful until after the shower." I stared at the screen, not because of the message, because I didn't recognize the number, and because whoever sent it wasn't talking about a baby shower. They were talking about hiding something. For the first time since the pregnancy, I felt my stomach tighten. I didn't know what was going on yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to ignore it. I didn't confront Stephanie that night. Getting angry without knowing the full story would have been stupid. I waited. The next morning, she told me she was meeting her mother for coffee before a prenatal appointment. I left for work like normal. Instead of driving to my office, I parked across the street from the coffee shop she liked. 3 hours later, I got my answer. A black SUV pulled into the parking lot. A man stepped out. Tall, expensive clothes, confident smile. Stephanie walked up to him and hugged him. Not the kind of hug married people ignore. The kind of hug married people divorce over. I watched them through the windshield. They sat together for nearly an hour, laughing, talking. At one point, he reached across the table and touched her hand. She didn't pull away. I took pictures. Then I drove to work. I didn't call. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. Facts first, reactions later. That evening, Stephanie acted completely normal. She kissed me on the cheek when I walked in. "How was your day?" "Productive." "Mine too." I looked at her for a second. The lying had become effortless. That interested me more than it upset me. A few days later, I got my chance. Stephanie went shopping with Linda. She left her tablet at home. No password, no caution. Arrogance makes people careless. I opened it. Within 10 minutes, I had everything. The man's name was Brandon Reed. He wasn't an old boyfriend. He was the son of one of Linda's wealthy social club friends. The messages went back months, far before the pregnancy, far before the positive test. I sat in my office and read every word. The affair wasn't accidental. It wasn't emotional. It was planned. Linda had arranged introductions. Linda had encouraged it. She believed Stephanie deserved a husband with more status. The fact that I had built a successful business meant nothing to her. I wasn't from the world she wanted access to. Then I found the message that ended my marriage. Stephanie had written, Tony will never question the timeline. He trusts me completely. A minute later, Linda replied, "Good. Let him keep paying the bills. That's what he's useful for." I read that one twice, not because it hurt, because it clarified everything. This wasn't love gone wrong. This was a business transaction, and I was the investor nobody planned to repay. Then I found something even better. A message from Brandon. "Are you sure your husband won't figure it out?" Stephanie responded, "Please, he spends half his life working. By the time the baby is born, he'll be too attached to walk away." I leaned back in my chair. Then I laughed, not because it was funny, because they had made a mistake. They thought I was attached, that I'd panic, that I'd try to negotiate. They didn't know me nearly as well as they believed. That afternoon, I called the best divorce attorney in the city. Her name was Vanessa Grant. After reviewing everything, she looked at me across her desk. "You have enough evidence to bury this case." "Good. What do you want to do?" I thought for about 2 seconds. Then I smiled. "Linda is planning a baby shower next month." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "And?" I slid the tablet across her desk. "I'm going to give Stephanie a present she'll never forget." Linda spared no expense on the baby shower. She rented the ballroom of a private golf resort outside the city. There were flower walls, custom decorations, photographers, and enough food to feed an army. Of course, nobody knew who paid the deposits. I did. Not because I was being generous, because I was setting the stage. The room was packed. Family, friends, business contacts. People Linda had spent years trying to impress. I arrived 15 minutes early. Stephanie was already there, moving from table to table while everyone congratulated her. When she saw me, she smiled. "You're late." "I'm right on time." She kissed my cheek. I let her. An hour later, everyone was eating and laughing. Then Linda stood up. A spoon hit a champagne glass. The room got quiet. "Here it comes," I thought. "My daughter has always dreamed of being a mother," Linda announced, "and none of this would have been possible without Tony." People applauded. I nodded politely. Then Linda smiled. "Tony has prepared a few words." Of course she wanted a speech. She thought she knew how the afternoon would end. She was wrong. I stood up and walked to the front of the room carrying a gift bag. Stephanie smiled at me from her chair. The photographer raised his camera. Perfect. I grabbed the microphone. "I do have something to say." The room went silent. "I've spent the last few months preparing for fatherhood." More smiles, more nods. Then I looked directly at Stephanie. And while I was preparing for fatherhood, my wife was preparing something else. The room instantly changed. People looked at each other. Stephanie's smile disappeared. I reached into the gift bag. Then I pulled out a large envelope. "Stephanie, this is for you." She took it slowly. "What is this?" "Open it." Her hands shook slightly. The moment she saw the first page, all the color drained from her face. Divorce petition. I watched her eyes move across the documents. Then she reached the screenshots, the text messages, the affair, the planning, everything. "Oh my God," she whispered. Linda rushed over. "What happened?" Stephanie couldn't even answer. I took the microphone again. "I'll help." Every eye in the room turned toward me. For those wondering, my wife has been sleeping with another man. The ballroom exploded with whispers. Linda looked like she'd been hit by a truck. "Tony," she snapped. "Sit down, Linda." The sharpness in my voice froze her. "For months, you and your daughter planned to convince me another man's child was mine." Gasps filled the room. Someone dropped a glass. Then I held up a stack of printed screenshots. I brought receipts. People started reaching for copies Vanessa had helped prepare. The room became absolute chaos. Then something happened that even I hadn't expected. The ballroom doors opened. A man walked in. Brandon. Apparently Linda had invited him without telling anyone. The moment he saw the screenshots in people's hands, his face changed. Stephanie stood up. "Brandon, wait! Are you kidding me?" he snapped. The room went silent again. He looked at Stephanie, then at Linda. "You told me he'd never find out." Linda's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Brandon laughed bitterly. "You said he'd sign the birth certificate and keep paying like an idiot." Now every person in the room was staring at Linda. The entire story was unraveling in real time. I looked at Brandon. "Looks like she lied to both of us?" For a moment, he just stood there. Then he shook his head. "Unbelievable." He turned around and walked straight out. Stephanie started crying. Linda looked ready to collapse. I put the microphone back on its stand. Then I looked directly at my wife. This child isn't my responsibility. Then I looked at her mother. And neither are you. I turned around. Nobody stopped me. As I walked out of the ballroom, I could hear the arguments starting behind me. The war had officially begun. And for once, I wasn't the one trapped inside it. The first call came before I even reached my truck. It was Stephanie. I declined it. Then another. Declined. Then another. By the time I got home, she had called 14 times. I wasn't interested in explanations. People explain mistakes. They don't explain plans. The next morning, Vanessa called. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Worse for them than for me." Good, because I spent half the night reading those messages. Your mother-in-law isn't nearly as smart as she thinks she is. That got my attention. What did you find? There are references to money. There were plenty. No specific money. An hour later, I was sitting in her office. She pushed several printed pages across the desk. I started reading. The more I read, the more ridiculous it became. Linda wasn't just trying to replace me. She was broke, completely broke. The country club memberships, the luxury vacations, the designer handbags. Most of it was debt, massive debt. And according to the messages, she'd been hiding it for years. Then I found the line that mattered. "Once Tony is on the birth certificate, we'll finally be secure." I looked up. Vanessa nodded. "That's not an affair anymore." "No, that's financial fraud." I smiled. Now things were getting interesting. 3 days later, Stephanie showed up at my office. Not at the house, not over the phone. My office. She knew I'd answer there. The receptionist called first. "Your wife is here." Ex-wife. "She says she won't leave." I stood up. "Send her in." Stephanie walked through the door looking exhausted. She sat down without being invited. "We need to talk." "No, you need to talk." She stared at me. "Tony, please." I folded my arms. She took a deep breath. "My mother pushed me into this." I laughed. That seemed to surprise her. "You really came here with that?" "It's true." "Did she force you into Brandon's car?" "No." "Did she force you into his apartment?" Stephanie looked away. That's what I thought. Tears formed in her eyes. I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, nothing. "Tony, I made a mistake." I leaned forward. "No, you made hundreds of decisions." Silence. "You don't accidentally build a lie for 8 months." She lowered her head. For a moment, I thought she might finally accept responsibility. Then she ruined it. "Can we fix this?" I almost admired the audacity. "You cheated." She stayed quiet. "You plan to make me raise another man's child." More silence. "You stood beside your mother while she mocked me." Her eyes filled with tears. I pointed toward the door. "We're done. Tony, we're done." My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. She stood up slowly. Then she asked the question she'd really come for. "What happens now?" I looked her straight in the eye. "Now you find out what life looks like without me paying for it." She left. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. Because 2 weeks later, Brandon called me. And what he told me made Stephanie and Linda's situation a whole lot worse. Brandon called on a Tuesday afternoon. I almost didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar, and I was in the middle of reviewing contracts with one of my warehouse managers. But something told me to pick up. "Tony? Who's this?" "It's Brandon." I leaned back in my chair. "What do you want?" A long pause followed. Then he said something I wasn't expecting. "I owe you the truth." That got my attention. "Go ahead." For the next 15 minutes, Brandon talked, and every minute made Linda look worse. According to him, Linda had approached him almost a year earlier at a charity event. She told him Stephanie's marriage was basically over. She told him Stephanie stayed with me because she was afraid of the financial consequences of divorce. She painted herself as the concerned mother trying to help her daughter move on. Brandon bought it. Then came the real surprise. She asked me for money. I sat up straighter. "How much?" "Started small." "How small?" "5,000. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it fit perfectly. "What was the reason?" "Medical expenses, then legal fees, then mortgage issues." "And you paid?" "Unfortunately." I shook my head. "How much total?" Silence. Then he answered. "Close to 80 grand. That stopped me. 80,000. Linda had been working both sides, using me as the future provider, using Brandon as the current provider. Neither of us had known. "Do you have proof?" I asked. I saved everything. Good. 3 days later, Vanessa had copies. Once she reviewed them, she leaned back in her chair. Your mother-in-law may be the most reckless woman I've ever seen. The divorce moved quickly after that. The evidence was overwhelming. Stephanie tried every argument imaginable. Stress, confusion, pressure, regret. None of it worked. Then the baby was born. A boy. I wasn't there. Didn't ask to be there. Didn't care to be there. The same week, Vanessa filed the paperwork, ensuring I would have absolutely no legal responsibility. No birth certificate, no parental rights, no parental obligations, nothing. Clean break. A month later, the house went on the market. Stephanie couldn't afford it, Linda couldn't save it, and Brandon had disappeared completely. The fantasy was collapsing exactly the way fantasies always do when reality shows up. Meanwhile, my life got quieter. I moved into a condo overlooking the river, focused on business, focused on myself. For the first time in years, nobody was draining my energy. Then one evening, 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I met someone named Rachel. And unlike Stephanie, Rachel never needed to pretend to be somebody else. I was grabbing coffee at a truck stop diner outside one of my distribution centers when she sat at the counter beside me. She managed operations for a food distribution company that shared several routes with mine. We started talking about freight delays. Not exactly a romantic beginning, but it was honest. A year later, we were living together. 2 years later, we were married. There was no chaos, no manipulation, no mother-in-law controlling every decision. Just peace. A month after the wedding, we bought a house outside the city with a view of the river. Quiet, private, and finally ours. The business grew. I expanded into 2 more states, bought another warehouse, hired more drivers. For the first time, every dollar I earned stayed where it belonged. Then Stephanie came back into my life. Not directly. Through Linda. It happened almost 3 years after the baby shower. I was leaving a restaurant after dinner with Rachel when I saw Linda standing beside my truck. She looked different, older, tired, smaller somehow. The expensive clothes were gone. The confidence was gone too. Rachel looked at me. You know her? Unfortunately. Linda stepped forward. Tony, please, just 5 minutes. Rachel started to speak. I shook my head. It's fine. Linda looked embarrassed. That alone was strange. The old Linda never felt embarrassed about anything. What do you want? She swallowed. Stephanie needs help. I almost laughed. Of course, not an apology, not accountability. Help. With what? The baby's medical bills. No. She blinked. Maybe she expected a conversation. She got an answer. No? No. Tony, he's innocent. So was I. Linda looked away. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she tried another angle. Stephanie is struggling. I nodded. I imagine she is. You're really going to turn your back on her? That question irritated me. Not because it hurt, because it ignored reality. I took a step closer. I didn't turn my back on Stephanie. Linda stared at me. Stephanie turned her back on me first. Silence. Then she asked me to finance it. Rachel stood quietly beside me, watching, listening, not interfering. Exactly what a partner should do. Linda's eyes watered. It might have worked on somebody else, not me. We don't have anyone else, she whispered. I looked at her for several seconds. Then I answered honestly. That stopped being my problem the day you decided I was just a wallet. She didn't have a response, because there wasn't one. Rachel and I got into the truck. As we pulled away, I saw Linda standing alone under the parking lot lights. The strange thing was, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel angry. I felt finished. Or at least I thought I was. Because 6 months later, I got a phone call that changed everything one last time. And this time, it was Stephanie herself. The call came on a Thursday night. Rachel was upstairs reading. I was sitting on the back patio looking over the river when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Something made me answer. Tony. Silence. Then a voice I hadn't heard in years. Hi. Stephanie. She sounded exhausted. Not sad, not emotional, just tired. What do you want? I asked. No point pretending. I just wanted to talk. You've got 30 seconds. A small laugh came through the phone. Even then, she recognized the old version of me. Direct. No games. No surprise there, she said. What do you want, Stephanie? Another pause. Then she finally said it. You were right. That wasn't what I expected. I stayed quiet. You warned me, she continued. You told me I'd find out what life looked like without you. And? You were right. I heard a car passing wherever she was. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said something that surprised me even more. My mother ruined my life. No! The word came out immediately. Firm, certain. No, she didn't. Silence. You were an adult. She didn't argue, because she knew I was right. My mother pushed, she said quietly. You chose. Another silence. Then she laughed bitterly. You always did that. Did what? Made things simple. Things are simple. That earned another quiet laugh. For the first time in years, it felt like I was speaking to the version of Stephanie I had originally married. Not the liar, not the manipulator, just the woman underneath all the bad decisions. I wanted to hate you, she admitted. I know. I told myself you humiliated me. You humiliated yourself. More silence. Then she said something honest. Maybe the first completely honest thing she'd said in years. I think that's what bothered me most. I didn't answer, because there wasn't anything to add. A few seconds later, she spoke again. The truth is, Brandon disappeared almost immediately. I wasn't surprised. The money disappeared too. Still not surprised. My mother lost everything. Again, not surprised. And I spent years blaming everyone except myself. I leaned back in my chair. The river moved quietly beyond the yard. Why are you telling me this? Because I finally stopped. Stopped what? Blaming everyone. For the first time that night, I respected the answer. Not enough to change anything, but enough to acknowledge it. Then she asked the question I knew was coming. Are you happy? I looked through the patio door. Rachel was walking downstairs, carrying a blanket. The house was warm, peaceful. Mine. Yeah, I said. I am. Stephanie was quiet for several seconds. Then she said, Good. And for the first time, I believed she meant it. I should let you go, she said. Probably. Another short laugh. Then she spoke one final time. I'm sorry, Tony. The old me might have waited years to hear that. The man I had become didn't need it anymore. Take care of yourself, Stephanie. You too. The line disconnected. I stared at the phone for a moment. Then I put it down. Rachel opened the patio door. Everything okay? Yeah. She sat beside me. Who was it? I thought about it for a second. Then I smiled. Nobody. And for the first time, that was actually true. The woman who had called wasn't part of my life anymore. She was part of a story, one that had ended a long time ago. Rachel leaned against my shoulder. The river moved quietly in the darkness. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. Then she took my hand. I've got some news. I looked over. The smile on her face told me everything before she even said it. My heart immediately started beating faster. Rachel? She nodded. We're having a baby. For a second, I just stared at her. Not because I was shocked, because life has a strange sense of timing. Years earlier, I had stood in a ballroom watching my marriage collapse. Now, I was sitting beside a woman who had never lied to me. A woman carrying my child. A real future. Not a fake one built on secrets. A real one. I squeezed her hand. Then I laughed. The kind of laugh that comes when you've finally stopped carrying old weight. The baby shower wasn't the day I lost a family. It was the day I saved my future. And now that future was finally arriving. Thank you for watching.